the topic of privilege can make us feel uncomfortable and even defensive. We often associate the concept with certain groups in society, particularly in relation to race, gender, and sexual orientation. But in many ways, don't we all have privilege? Privilege can be defined as the rights, advantages, and protections available to a particular individual or groups of people. Though people benefit from privilege, they often don't do anything to obtain it because privilege is granted based on membership to a specific group. For example, we have no control over our age or race. This reality makes some forms of privilege more critical to understand, since those who are disadvantaged may have no way of establishing equitable treatment. As a Black woman, I don't naturally see myself as privileged, but when I dig deeper, I know there are ways I am. We asked members of the RISE team and several others to reflect on their own privilege. Here's what they had to say.
When I think about privilege, the first thing I'm struck with is how little I've had to think about that my entire life, and that in itself is a privilege. And the tipping point for me was really a college course, and really started to examine what those privileges meant for me, opportunities that it created for me in my life, and an understanding that there were forces in society designed to create those privileges for certain groups, particularly groups that looked like me, and what I could do as a white male to work to dismantle these systems of oppression that created a power and privilege structure that benefits some to the detriment of others.
I'm Mexican American from Southern Arizona and have family on the US side and the Mexico side. So I grew up seeing the differences and similarities between the two cultures and the lifestyles. And what really hit home for me at a young age was realizing that I had privilege over some of my family members and my friends.
I used to think that, being Jewish, that I wasn't necessarily afforded the same privileges as someone who was Christian, and just having the fear of maybe facing anti-Semitism, being in different places, not really being able to outwardly be who I was to the fullest extent because of that fear. And then I kind of realized that that really wasn't the best way to think about it, and also that privilege doesn't necessarily mean the majority in every single sect of an identity, right? Privilege doesn't mean that white, Christian, rich, whatever, that's not the only definition of privilege, and that privilege can come in so many different ways. But in reality, I've come to realize that there are different parts of my identity that do afford me privilege.
And recently, I really have been thinking quite a lot about the concept of privilege. As a woman of color in the United States who is not born into a wealthy family, I have rarely actually ever considered myself or actually factually been in a position of privilege. But recently I have become very aware of some of my privilege as the world experiences this COVID-19 pandemic. I had the privilege to stop getting on public transportation when I truly felt uncomfortable. That is not a privilege that everyone has. I have the privilege of being able to shelter in place in comfort with my family and enough space that no one is losing it yet.
I first remember identifying my own privilege when I was in middle school and high school, when I was dealing with school activities or sports, where I had the privilege of having both parents at home and both parents who were very supportive of me. And I remember looking up in the stands, and I would see, again, both my parents there, and then many of my teammates didn't have one parent there, much less both their parents there. Even back then, I recognized that was a distinct privilege for me and an advantage for me that everybody else didn't have. And even moving on into my career as I as I took my career in law enforcement. I had the privilege of having family members, including my father and uncles, who were involved in law enforcement as supervisors, involved in law enforcement for decades. Their reputation, their name reputation, the good name that they made, for me, certainly helped me.
And so my privilege has become more clear during this time. And as I think on it more, the truth is that I am also part of a system, part of society that allows these inequities, and so I am benefiting from this privilege, and really am grappling with how do I leverage this privilege to address some of those inequities.
And I want to take advantage of the privileges that I've had, and I hope I've done a good job so far, and I want to do even more where I share my privilege through the power I have now. Share my privilege through the power I have that's been afforded to me by sharing some of these opportunities with the youth in our community.
My perspective on privilege was negative. I felt guilty. I'm learning to understand that once someone recognizes that they have privilege or they're coming from a place of privilege, that's powerful. And with that power, take action.
Although privilege can be an uncomfortable topic, when we're aware of our own privilege, we can use it for good. Privilege gives us the power and influence to assist those who do not have similar advantages. We suggest that as you reflect on your own privilege, consider the ways you can give access and provide opportunities to others.